At the beginning of the 3rd century BC, Rome was rapidly expanding, conquering cities and increasing its territory. This began to unsettle some cities in southern Italy, like Tarentum, a wealthy city that wanted to remain free. Fearing domination by Rome, the people of Tarentum needed help. That's when they called on Pyrrhus, the king of Epirus in Greece, to come and face the Romans. Pyrrhus was already famous for being a great commander, and when he received the call for help, he saw an opportunity to expand his influence even further. He wasn't just coming to aid Tarentum, he wanted to conquer new lands. And he didn't come alone. He brought with him a powerful army. When Pyrrhus arrived in Italy, the Romans sensed the danger. He wasn't just another enemy, he was different, and that set everyone on alert. While Rome prepared for what was to come, Tarentum placed all its hopes in Pyrrhus to save the city. With Pyrrhus ready to fight, the first great clash between him and Rome was about to begin. In 280 BC, the first major battle between the Romans and Pyrrhus took place near Heraclea. Pyrrhus brought a strong, well-trained army ready to face the Roman legions. On the other hand, the Romans approached the confrontation with caution. Pyrrhus was known for his war tactics and for being a relentless commander, but the Roman legions, though inexperienced in this type of warfare, were prepared to fight. When the battle began, Pyrrhus' strength proved superior. The clash between the two armies was brutal, and the Romans, who had already faced many enemies in the Italian peninsula, found themselves facing a challenge unlike any other. Despite their bravery, the legions were pushed back. Pyrrhus' Greek forces, with their organizati, even after fighting with all they had, the Romans couldn't hold back Pyrrhus' advance. This defeat had a profound impact on Rome. Pyrrhus won the Battle of Heraclea, but he realized that even in defeat, the Romans were different. They resisted in a way he hadn't expected. The war against Rome was just beginning, and Pyrrhus knew he would need more than just one victory to conquer them. Pyrrhus's victory at Heraclea had one element that the Romans would never forget: war elephants. These animals, which they had never seen before, were like monsters on the battlefield. With their sharp tusks and massive bodies, they were Pyrrhus's secret weapon, something that completely unsettled the Roman legions. The elephants charged through enemy ranks, crushing everything in their path. The deafening noise, the cries of pain, and the ground trembling beneath their feet terrified the Roman soldiers. To them, it was impossible to know how to fight against something so large and so unknown. Many fled, while others were trampled without a chance to react. Each advance by the elephants was a blow to the heart of Roman morale, which had never faced anything like this before. Even with the victory, Pyrrhus knew he couldn't rely solely on the elephants. They were a powerful weapon, but at the same time difficult to control and dangerous even for his own soldiers. He began to realize that although they were terrifying for the Romans, the elephants also posed their own challenges. The terror Pyrrhus caused in the Roman legions was strong, but he knew he needed much more than elephants to win this war. With the victory and the use of the elephants, Pyrrhus moved forward confidently. But soon the consequences of Heraclea would begin to weigh, and Rome wouldn't remain quiet for long. Pyrrhus's victory at Heraclea shook Rome deeply. They were not used to losing, and that defeat left a mark. The Roman legions couldn't stop talking about the war elephants they had faced, monsters that spread chaos on the battlefield. For the soldiers who survived, the fear of those gigantic animals remained alive in their memories. But the Romans, as always, were stubborn. Despite the defeat, they quickly began to recover. Instead of retreating, they were determined to learn from their mistakes. They studied Pyrrhus' tactics and thought about how they would face the elephants next time. Roman pride had been wounded, but their will to fight only grew stronger. They knew it wouldn't be easy, but giving up was never an option. On the other hand, Pyrrhus also began to feel the weight of the war. His men were exhausted, and keeping an army far from home demanded more than he had anticipated. Even though he had won an important battle, Pyrrhus realized that defeating Rome would be much more complicated than it seemed. The Romans were not an easy enemy to overcome, and it would take more than brute force to win this war. After the victory at Heraclea, Pyrrhus wasted no time. He knew the Romans wouldn't give up easily, so in the following year, both armies met again, this time at Asculum. Once again, Pyrrhus's war elephants were ready to cause chaos among the Roman ranks. And once again, the clash was brutal. The battle was difficult from the start. The Romans, though still fearing the elephants, had learned from the mistakes at Heraclea. They were better prepared and more determined not to let panic take over. Even so, Pyrrhus's might, combined with the elephants, managed to break through the Roman lines once again. The victory went to Pyrrhus, but not without a cost. The battlefield was covered in bodies, both Roman and Pyrrhic soldiers. Pyrrhus could celebrate another victory, but as he looked at his exhausted men and the number of losses, he began to question how far he could go. Every victory was costing him more than the last. While Rome still had the strength to resist, Pyrrhus wondered if his army could endure another battle at this pace. The victory at Asculum was bitter, and the future of the war seemed increasingly uncertain. After Asculum, Pyrrhus didn't feel victorious. Yes, he had won 2 battles against the Romans, but with each victory, his army grew weaker. The losses were enormous. The truth was that, while the Romans were suffering, Pyrrhus was suffering even more. He began to realize that if he continued winning in this way, in the end, he wouldn't have any soldiers left to celebrate. It was at this point that the famous expression, Pyrrhic victory, took on its meaning. The victory didn't have the sweet taste of other triumphs. It was heavy, bitter, and full of doubts. Each battle cost him so much that Pyrrhus wondered whether these victories were worth the sacrifice. Rome, with its stubbornness, was showing that it would not bow. Pyrrhus was fighting against an enemy that, even when wounded, rose again. The expression became famous due to Pyrrhus's own remark, "Another victory like this, and I am ruined." He knew that Rome would not be easily conquered, and that with each victory, he lost more than he gained. It was a type of victory that brought no real advantage, only an uncertain future, and the feeling of fighting something impossible to defeat. While Pyrrhus reflected on his difficult victories, the Romans were far from giving up. One of Rome's greatest strengths was its ability to learn from defeat. After each battle, the Roman legions analyzed what had gone wrong, studied their enemies' tactics, and looked for solutions. The elephants, which had once been a source of panic, were no longer such a great mystery. Rome was learning, and this would be a serious problem for Pyrrhus. Little by little, the Romans began to develop new tactics to confront the elephants and better withstand the Greek advances. Instead of scattering in panic, they started using tighter formations and longer spears to wound the animals. Furthermore, their will to fight only grew stronger. What had once been fear was now transformed into determination. Each defeat Pyrrhus inflicted seemed to fuel the Romans' desire to keep fighting. Pyrrhus sensed that no matter how many victories he achieved, Rome only became stronger. The triumphs he won seemed short-lived, as Rome quickly regrouped and returned to the battlefield. And with each battle, he saw his own army grow more exhausted. He knew he couldn't keep going like this for long. Rome, on the other hand, seemed to gain strength with every blow it took. Faced with the difficulties in Italy, Pyrrhus decided to expand his horizons and try something new. His attention now turned to Sicily, where he saw a new opportunity. With problems piling up in Italy and victories over Rome not yielding the results Pyrrhus had hoped for, he decided to change his strategy. He turned his eyes towards Sicily, a rich island contested by both Greeks and Carthaginians. To Pyrrhus, conquering Sicily seemed like the perfect chance to turn the tide and gain an advantage in the war. When Pyrrhus arrived in Sicily, he was received as a hero by some Greek cities, which were already weary of the constant Carthaginian attacks. At first, everything went well. Pyrrhus achieved some important victories, and his name was soon celebrated by the Greeks on the island. He believed he could use Sicily as a base to expand his power and finally gain the control he sought. For the first time in a long time, it seemed fortune was on his side. But as had happened in Italy, things started to get complicated. Pyrrhus wasn't prepared for the fierce resistance from the Carthaginians, who fought with all they had to maintain control of the island. Furthermore, his authoritarian stance began to irritate his own Greek allies, who expected more cooperation. What started as an opportunity for success soon became a burden, further weakening his army and diverting Pyrrhus from his main objective. With the problems in Sicily mounting, Pyrrhus realized he needed to return to Italy. It was time to face the Romans once more, in search of a final chance at victory. After the failures in Sicily, and with his Greek allies becoming more distant, Pyrrhus decided it was time to return to Italy. He knew the situation with the Romans could not be ignored any longer. Pyrrhus was aware that his army no longer had the strength it once did, but the only way out seemed to be a decisive confrontation against Rome. He was willing to stake everything on one last battle. The setting for this confrontation was the city of Beneventum. There, the two armies met for what would be the final chapter of Pyrrhus's long campaign in Italy. Although he was an experienced commander, the situation was no longer in his favor. His soldiers were exhausted, and the wear and tear of so many campaigns was beginning to show. On the other side, the Romans were more prepared than ever. They had learned from their past mistakes and were determined to defeat Pyrrhus once and for all. The battle was fierce, but this time Pyrrhus couldn't maintain control. The Roman legions, now more experienced and stronger, broke through his lines and pushed his troops back. The defeat was inevitable. Pyrrhus, who had once seemed invincible, watched his army collapse at Beneventum, along with his dream of dominating Italy. With the defeat at Beneventum, Pyrrhus saw his dreams of dominating Italy. The battle had been the final blow to an army that was already worn out and demoralized. There was no more energy or resources to continue fighting. Pyrrhus, who had arrived in Italy full of hope and ambition, was now forced to accept that the campaign was lost. The decision to withdraw was not easy for Pyrrhus. He was a proud leader, but reality prevailed. Without enough men, and with the Romans growing stronger with each confrontation, he had no choice but to return home. What had once seemed like an opportunity to expand his power in the Mediterranean now became a bitter defeat. For the Romans, it marked the end of a threat that had lasted for years and demonstrated the strength of their resilience. As he left Italy, Pyrrhus knew that his name would be remembered for his victories, but also for his failure. The term Pyrrhic victory became synonymous with triumphs that cost too much to be worth it. His retreat marked the end of his ambitions in both Italy and Sicily, closing one of the most grueling and challenging campaigns of his life. Pyrrhus's withdrawal from Italy marked the end of one of the most intense campaigns of the era. His initial victories, which had once seemed to pave the way for dominance over Rome, became an unsustainable burden. Every battle, even the ones he won, cost him so much that in the end, there were no resources or soldiers left to continue. Pyrrhus was forced to leave Italy, abandoning his dreams of conquest. For Rome, Pyrrhus' defeat was a turning point. It showed the world that Rome was more than just an enemy. It was a people that learned from its defeats, adapted to any challenge, and, above all, never gave up. Pyrrhus had underestimated this determination. At the end of his campaign, he made clear what a Pyrrhic victory meant. A triumph so costly, it ultimately felt like defeat. Back in Greece, Pyrrhus didn't find the glory he sought. His victories made him famous, but they also isolated him. He had lost more than just soldiers in his campaigns. He had lost allies, time, and ultimately, the chance to achieve his ambitions. His name entered history, but not as the great conqueror he had hoped to be. Instead, he became the example of how gaining power can often mean losing everything. The legacy of Pyrrhus and his battles served as a lesson both for him and for the Romans. Rome learned that with patience and adaptation, it could overcome even the most powerful enemies. And Pyrrhus, he learned that not all victories are worth the price they demand. If you enjoyed learning more about this fascinating story of ambition, power, and costly defeats, don't miss our next stories about Rome and its challenges. Subscribe and keep diving into the rich history of one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever seen.